Hello, everybody.
Hello.
It's nice to see some familiar faces again. Bear with us. We'll just wait a couple of minutes just to let some people in, and then we'll get started. Right, I think we should, I'll just keep an eye on letting people in. Just to let everybody know, this is being recorded this evening, so if you're unhappy about being seen, if you can just turn off your video, but that'd be great. So I'd like to welcome everybody to SSA Dialogues. Tonight we have Noel Griffin with us, who will be taking us through some slides and some video pieces that he's been working on. Wee bit more of housework, housekeeping, sorry, let's not do any housework tonight for sure. But just if everyone can keep their mics on mute, just to make sure that we can hear Noel, that will make it easier. And at the end of his talk, we'll open up the floor for some questions. We're also live on YouTube, so if anybody there has any questions, we'll bring them over to Noel. So I'm just going to pass you over to Noel.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone. So firstly, I'd just like to thank Jamie for inviting me to chat about my work this evening, and also thanks everyone for joining. So I'll just share my slides. Is that working? It is, okay, great. So just a bit of background to me. I graduated from the Glasgow School of Art in 2019, and my work explores the relationship between technology, mythology, and also the natural world. So when preparing for this talk, I couldn't help but reflect upon the strange position which we find ourselves in, talking and sharing ideas to each other through our computer screens, only made possible through developments in technology and invention of tools. Human beings have been telling stories since the first cave woman struck a flint against another flint and noticed an interesting spark flew off, igniting the dry earth at her feet and illuminating the dark recesses of the cave where she took shelter. The warmth and light from this fire provided the conditions for which to tell stories, to share knowledge, to perform and express ourselves. The warmth and light from this fire provided, tonight our faces are illuminated not by the soft, warm glow of fire, but by the harsh, cold glow of our digital screens. So to start this talk, I'm going to show a 2-minute clip of a film that I made for the RSA New Contemporaries earlier this year. It's entitled Bones of Your Mother. It's constructed by an artificial intelligence, which I trained on various images, and I asked the artificial intelligence to generate new images from what it had learned. So here's the result of this.
A lifeless lump, unfashioned and unframed, of jarring seeds and justly chaos named. Earth, air and water were in one. All were confused and each disturbed the rest. For hot and cold were in one body fixed, and soft with hard and light with heavy mixed. And then was man designed, conscious of thought, of more capacious breast, for empire formed, and fit to rule the rest, whether with particles of heavenly fire the god of nature did his soul inspire, or earth, but new divided from the sky, and pliant, still retained the ethereal energy, which wise Prometheus tempered into paste, and mixed with living streams, the godlike image cast. Thus, while the mute creation downward bend their sight, and to their earthly mother tend, man looks aloft, and with erected eyes beholds his own hereditary skies. From such rude principles our form began, and earth was metamorphosed into man. Then landmarks limited to each his right, but greedy mortals, rummaging her store, digged from her entrails first the precious ore, which next to hell the prudent gods had laid, and that alluring ill to sight displayed. Thus cursed steel and more accursed gold gave mischief birth, and made that mischief bold. But digging deeper in stone and waters, did man uncover petroleum, lithium, silica, copper. Then death did wretched man invade, by steel assaulted, and by gold betrayed. Now brandished technics glittering in their hands, mankind is broken loose from moral bands.
Okay, so I'm not going to discuss too much of this just now because I'm going to end with another final clip of that film. So I'll discuss this piece which kind of looks back at what I was discussing with the cave and the fire, the first tools of humanity, we can say. So this is a piece of work entitled The 7 Ages of Man, and it features a series of flints, each cast in a different material and each representing a technological age in the timeline of man. So if we begin clockwise with the kind of reddish looking flint, is stone, then bronze, iron, steel, coal, plastic, and the last is a digital flint, a 3D model of a flint, which would be available online. So it was interesting to me that the first tool of man's creation is one of creation, but also of destruction, necessary for survival in the creation of fire, but also a weapon of violence. A plastic or digital flint, for that matter, will not spear one's prey or start a fire, but is altogether a more violent weapon of destruction on our planet. So you may have noticed at the beginning of the talk, I titled this discussion Technics in Time, and this refers to the French philosopher Bernard Stiegler's text. And Stiegler believes that man only comes into existence with the arrival of tools. Human evolution is inseparable from technological evolution and the evolution of technology. One cannot simply think of human beings as a natural animal isolated from the external material world. What he becomes and what he is essentially bound up with techniques from the beginning. We are inseparable from technology. So the work, The 7 Ages of Man, I kind of was thinking about this idea of technological singularity, where technological growth will become uncontrollable and surpass human intelligence. And I'm not going to pretend that I fully understand technological singularity, because it kind of blows my mind a little bit. So I'm going to just read a brief quote to illustrate that. So we will soon create intelligences greater than our own. When this happens, human history will have reached a kind of singularity, an intellectual transition as impenetrable and as knotted space-time at the centre of a black hole, and the world will pass far beyond our understanding. This this singularity, I believe, already haunts a number of science fiction writers. It makes realistic exploration to an interstellar future impossible. To write a story set more than a century hence, one needs a nuclear war in between so that the world remains intelligible. And that's a quote by Bernard Vinge, who writes about singularity. So it's kind of the idea that humans struggle to imagine a future unless it's one of destruction, a way to kind of stop this acceleration so that we can comprehend kind of our future. So I'm going to discuss now the kind of emergence of technology and fire in the Greek myth of Prometheus. So this is a well-known myth, I'm sure lots of you know it, but I'm just going to give a brief overview of it. So Prometheus was a titan who is credited with the creation of man from clay, which he breathes life into. He attempts to better the lives of his creation, brought him into conflict with Zeus. Prometheus stole fire from the heavens and delivered it to mortal kind. This fire allowed humans to survive and technologically evolve, separating them from animals. As punishment, Zeus chained Prometheus to a mountain, where an eagle was sent to feed upon his ever-regenerating liver. So my degree show in 2019 was titled HEPATOSCOPY, and it was directly influenced by the Promethean myth. So I went about exploring how the ancient past connected to contemporary and future concerns. The installation is comprised of a 3D printer, which is programmed to produce a synthetic liver. So that's just an image of the 3D printer working there. I downloaded a scan of a human liver from an archive of open source medical files online. The organ was printed in a bioplastic material, built up slowly layer by layer over the course of a day, and this would be repeated each day of the exhibition. Simultaneously, the previous day's liver is presented in a glass vitrine which decomposes, dissolving in a cloud of steam. The hard plastic eventually transforms to a pool of liquid. So this process becomes a form of ritual cycle of creation and destruction, which is sustained over the course of the exhibition. So the work begins as a series of digital files meticulously planned out on computer software. However, when entering into the physical world, the work becomes messy, chaotic and visceral. The technology prone to error and at times malfunctioning. So the presentation I was looking for it to be kind of a hybrid of presentations. It kind of looks as if it maybe is museological, but then it's also almost like a laboratory or a factory or a surgical theatre, Prometheus undergoing a liver transplant. So another thing I was interested in was how the liver was explored through cultures, through history. The Babylonians believed that the liver was the central organ of the human body, the seat of life, soul, emotions, and intelligence. By inspecting the liver, they believed they were able to see into the future and read what the gods had written there by interpreting various forms and shapes in the organ. The form of divination was known as HEPATOSCOPY, which I titled my degree show. The Babylonians constructed clay tablet reliefs, seen on the right, which they used in order to attempt to decipher these messages, which ranged from predicting the weather to making decisions in a battle. Individual marks had specific meanings. For instance, a patch of colour shows a drying up of resources or a plague. A hole shows a great loss or death. I was interested, going back to just look at these previous slides to give you a better idea. I was interested in allowing the machine in my work to become a performer. It's out with my control as the artist. As theorist Donna Haraway would suggest, the viewer comes to experience a more than human world where humans, machines, and animate objects intermingle. So the ancient Greeks must have had quite a good understanding of biology. They were aware that the liver was able to regenerate itself as the only organ in the human body able to do so. And the liver regenerative properties remains as fascinating to us today as it did in ancient times. So in the future, understanding the liver could hold a promise to the generation of synthetic organs, which could potentially render us immortal, like in so many science fiction tales. Perhaps by gazing into the decaying 3D printed liver in my installation, the viewer may spy the future of humanity. So this is a quote by, oh, I don't seem to have it written down. Who is this quote by? I'll come back to that if I forget. The hierarchy of substances is abolished. A single one replaces them all. The whole world can be plasticized and even life itself. Sorry, my camera is covering up the even life itself. We are told they are beginning to make plastic aortas. So this is another piece which was in the installation, which is a 3D printed relief. And it kind of mirrored, I felt, the aesthetics of the clay tablets of the Babylonian period. And I imagined the hole gouged in Prometheus's torso. Inside it appears somewhere between digital hardware or maybe even an imagined landscape. So I was very grateful that this piece was selected to be part of the Aeon Community Art Awards in London. And this is a mentorship opportunity for new graduates to kind of teach them business skills and how to survive financially. And the work would be shown at the Aeon headquarters. And it's also going to be options next year, if anyone's interested. So the opportunity kind of made me think about work that maybe didn't self-destruct or decay and could actually be sold, which is quite nice. So also following on from my degree show, I was really lucky to be awarded the Jonathan Ross Scholarship by the Royal Scottish Academy, which allowed me to live in Florence for 4 months and undertake a period of research, in between, of course, stuffing my face with pasta and gelato. So I'm going to discuss briefly some of the ideas I was exploring during this residency in Italy, and which I hope kind of in some way reflects kind of the work for my degree show in a way. So whilst I was in Florence, it was the height of the tourist season, where it was almost impossible to see some of the most famous artworks, such as Michelangelo's David. It was clear to me that most visitors saw David through their smartphones. It was important to get the perfect picture to post on Instagram it, or it didn't happen. I began looking at Instagram photos tagged in this location and decided to make a work from this data. So I used a software which is known as photogrammetry, which takes the data from a set of 2D images and is able to construct from this a 3D form, if that makes sense. So I fed the thousands of Instagram images into this software. So where there were more photos taken, for instance, maybe the face, the form was more detailed in the scan and legible. Where less photos were taken, the sculpture was misshapen, almost as if unfinished by Michelangelo. Or in other cases, the software wasn't able to decipher any form at all. There wasn't enough images, and therefore the figure was left with empty gouges in its form. So it's kind of interesting to me that the back of the sculpture was always missing, as fewer people decided to upload a photo of David's rear to their Instagram feed. Possibly it violated Instagram censoring, or maybe users just didn't want it on their feed, who knows? So I noticed as time went on, there was less tourists visiting Florence and less uploading photos of David to Instagram. My digital David therefore began to decay, to fragment and decay. So here you can see the form just becomes kind of completely, it becomes over time completely illegible, with these kind of triangular polygons becoming visible in areas not being able to be fully registered by the software, and I find this really intriguing. So here's another photo of that. So the work has kind of taken on this new dimension due to coronavirus, with the academia being closed to the public. The digital David has disappeared completely from view, leaving only an empty plinth. It seems even marble sculptures are not immune from COVID-19. So this kind of reminded me of the philosophical question: if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, it doesn't make a sound. So if an artwork such as David is not continually reproduced and disseminated, does it exist as an artwork at all? So the final kind of area that I'm going to discuss came about from my research in Florence again, and it appropriates another Greek myth, which is kind of lesser known than the Promethean myth, which is Deucalion and Pyrrha, which appears in Ovid's Metamorphoses. So Deucalion is actually the son of Prometheus, which links in quite well in my work. And if the Promethean myth is Adam and Eve in Christianity, Deucalion's myth bears resemblance to Noah's Ark. So the gods send a great flood which destroys humanity in order to purify the old world from its sins. Only one man, Deucalion, and one woman, Pyrrha, are spared. They are warned by their wise father Prometheus, who sees the deluge in the future. The pair are left lonely and struck with grief at a desolate world, and consults an oracle of Themis how to repopulate the world. The oracle says, "Cast behind you the bones of your mother." At first they're puzzled, but as soon they realise that mother must be the earth, and therefore its bones are the stones and mud. When the pair casts the stones and mud by their feet behind them, and they touch the ground, they are metamorphosed into a new race of humans, but also monstrous creatures never seen before. So I kind of imagined this myth in relation to the current climate crisis, of rising oceans and a polluted earth. Also the image on the right is Lancelotti's grotto, which is in the Boboli Gardens in Florence, which is based around this myth. And it's kind of this very theatrical kind of space. You're only actually allowed in it for 15 minutes a day, so I spent most of my time waiting outside the gates to get in, also in the pouring rain as well, which kind of fitted in with the myth. And also while I was leaving Florence was also the time of the Venice floods, if people remember how bad that was. So it kind of seems as if the gods were telling me to make this work. So I used this myth to as my kind of basis for the RC New Contemporaries, which I was selected for. So here's the installation, which kind of features a diorama in the centre, with this kind of imagined robotic hybrid creature. It's kind of part fossil, part industrial waste, kind of a mixture of things all kind of pieced together. And it's also powered, importantly, by pollution. The robot is displayed in what appears to be a natural history diorama, normally presenting dead taxidermy specimens. Instead, the creature twitches into life, and thus the kind of diorama is almost a bit like an incubator. So the robot is powered by sea sediment, which I collected from the River Clyde. These are just some pictures of the robot, but I'll come back to that maybe. So it was powered by sea sediment I collected from the River Clyde and from a very like polluted area that I could see tons of like plastic waste. And I created what's known as microbial fuel cells. And this is a kind of bioelectrochemical process which is able to convert bacteria into a form of green energy. And I'm not going to discuss this too much because, again, I don't really understand everything about it. I've kind of watched YouTube videos and was able to kind of piece together this thing, these kind of batteries, which did end up working, so I was kind of pleased with that. So this technology provides kind of a hope for tackling the climate crisis. However, the technology is currently not kind of fully realised, and so the robotic creature cannot be fully animated and exists between life and death, waiting for a future where it can break free from the diorama and exist in the real world. So I'm just going to go back and kind of let you see the photos, so I realise I'm probably rushing through certain images. So here's just, and I kind of thought about the kind of pieces in the foreground kind of mirrored the texture of Boanzoletti's grotto as well, these kind of blobby kind of melting forms. And the background is kind of the typical diorama, the kind of panoramic scene which is taken from the film. You kind of might recognise that kind of imagery of the kind of landscape kind of being formed from nothing. So yeah, and that's just a close-up of the robot. Okay, so I also make these kind of sculptural kind of characters which kind of go along with the work. So this is the Oracle of Themis, and it's kind of based on the kind of these kind of vessels that the kind of ancient priestesses would kind of look in and kind of make a prediction about the future. And I kind of made this into this kind of character. So I kind of make these all in a computer program, and then I print them and finish them and texture them. So it's kind of almost a bit like making a prop from a film. Like it's kind of the same techniques are kind of used in fabricating film props. So I kind of felt that it was kind of interesting. So these are, during lockdown, I've been kind of finding things to do. So I've kind of been making this kind of archive in my bedroom of kind of strange objects that I found. So these are kind of plastic rocks. They're called plastiglomerates, and they've been classed as a new kind of rock, essentially, by geographical people. So it's kind of a hybrid of plastic waste and natural material. It's suggested that this new material could be a potential marker for the Anthropocene epoch. So as Roland Barthes states, so more than a substance, plastic is the very idea of infinite transformation. So I kind of think that plastiglomerates as a material touch on quite a lot of the themes in my practice: an amalgamation of ancient past and technological future, a collision of natural and synthetic, creation and destruction, and the relationship between the human and non-human entities. So I think the next thing is a film. So is my time okay, Jamie, to show like a 2-minute clip? So I think this actually ends a bit short, but I'll let you see anyway. Oh.
The stones, a miracle to mortal view, the long tradition makes it pass for true. Did first the rigour of their kind expel, and suppled into softness as they fell, then swelled and swelling, by degrees grew warm, and took the rudiments of beastly form, imperfect shapes, in marble such as seen, when the root chiselled as the man begin, while yet the roughness of the stone remains, without the rising muscles in the veins, the sappy parts, and next resembling juice, were turned to moisture for the creature's use, supplying power, blood and nourishment. The rest, too solid to receive a bent, converts to bones, and what was once a vein its ancient name and nature did retain. the moist mud by the couple's feet, digested by the sun's ethereal heat, as in a kindly womb began to breed, then swelled and quickened by the vital seed. The fat manure with heavenly fire is warmed, and crusted creatures from this polluted waste are formed, some rude, and yet unfinished in their kind, short of limbs, and they...
Oh, sorry, it ended there. But anyway, so that was this kind of another follow-on part from the first film that you saw. It's made by artificial intelligence, and it's kind of, it almost feels like I'm kind of collaborating with this kind of crazy thing that I kind of can't control, but the kind of images that it was making seem to fit very well with the kind of narrative, and kind of I've put the kind of voice reading Ovid's Metamorphosis over the top and changed it to kind of set it in this kind of possible future. So I think I'm going to end there. I'm not sure how long that was, but thank you for listening to my talk. I'll maybe hand over to Jamie if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. If we could just get you to stop sharing your screen, and we can see everybody's lovely faces. Okay. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Noel? We do. We've got some in the chat as well, so I will take some here and then I'll ask you from the chat box. Frederick, would you like to ask a question? Oh, have you frozen? Oh,
Pedestrian question. I'm here, yeah.
Yeah.
The film at the beginning was great and fascinating. The words were sometimes hard to hear, but I think that was probably intentional. But I could tell that it was a rhyming text, and I didn't know what the text was, and that's what I'd like to know. What was the text for the first film?
Yeah, so it is, the audio, I apologise, I had a bit of trouble. I think when it goes through Zoom, sometimes some of the audio is lost. So normally you would kind of hear most of the thing. There's kind of parts that it's intended to kind of merge into kind of music and things like that, but it's a translation of Ovid's Metamorphosis by an English poet. And
I should have recognised it. I only know it in the Latin.
Yeah, and I've now realised that that was one of the things I was going to write down, and I seem to have forgotten to do that. So I think maybe a good idea would maybe to be, maybe if you message me on Instagram, I can tell you exactly what that was, because I've now somehow lost it and I can't check on my computer. But yes, I'll get back to you, Frederick, if that's okay.
That's great.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to ask? Oh, Livy?
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you for that. It was really interesting. Obviously, I've heard about your work before, and I was just wondering, in the future now, what are your plans? Because it seems like you want to alert people about these issues, but obviously in the art way. So kind of just thinking what projects you've got planned or how you plan to move forward.
Yeah, so I kind of have quite a lot of ideas that kind of, it's quite hard to kind of describe how I work, because the ideas kind of just come into my head, but I kind of make these kind of archives of lots of different issues that I'm thinking of, and it's very kind of desperate in a way. It's kind of, it can be kind of ancient stories that I pick up in an archive, or it can be a news article that I've read. So I am kind of, I'm focusing kind of on kind of ecological issues at the moment, and in a way, you might have kind of guessed from the work, but I kind of like the idea that the work kind of evolves. It's kind of never ending in a way. Kind of, if I go back to kind of the sculpture of David, it's kind of, I've kind of given the tools for it to kind of generate itself. So I'm kind of going to try and see how these things might connect in together. And also I'm kind of wanting to make more kind of film work. So over lockdown, it's been quite a good time for me to kind of teach myself kind of things that I've not necessarily been taught in art school. Because I studied a painting degree, so I didn't end up making much kind of film while I was at GSA. So this is kind of just seems like a good opportunity to kind of explore my ideas, and because they're quite rich in kind of narrative and references, I think it's interesting to show film alongside the kind of sculptural work. That makes sense. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. I guess so. You're constantly looking, obviously, for things. I guess like you're constantly on the ball looking for things like say news articles or anything like that. So yeah, it's interesting to see what you'll do next.
I think with the plastiglomerate kind of artifacts, that's something that I'm finding a way in how to imagine them in my work. I've kind of have ideas of, there's a thing called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, it's called, which is kind of an area in the Pacific which is really dense of plastic, microplastic waste. And then they're discovering that there's kind of new ecosystems that we've accidentally birthed that live off this plastic, and kind of imagining kind of more than human kind of other kind of creature that could kind of emerge and kind of take over from humans, and how are we going to live with these new humans. So kind of imagine these plastic-glomerates being like enlarged digitally as like islands in the middle of an ocean, and kind of what creatures might live in these islands is kind of the things that go on in my head. So.
Thank you. Judith, I think you had a question?
Just going back to the sculptures you did on David,
Mm-hmm.
were they actually, did you actually print them, or were they just the images that happened from this computer?
Yeah, so I have printed various ones before, so I was kind of doing it sort of weekly, and I would end up with these kind of 3D models, which then I kind of transfer into a digital space. So I basically remodeled the museum on my computer, placed it in, and then kind of used basically a digital camera to kind of re-photograph them, and then kind of my idea is kind of to repost them on Instagram, if you know what I mean. They kind of become confused between what's the tourist images that are being placed in, but I don't know in a way if it's more powerful having them kind of just as images, because I wasn't really satisfied with the kind of sculptures that I was creating, and I'm not really sure why, but I think it's because it derives from kind of the dissemination of art through the image. I was kind of interested in having them just be images, if that makes sense.
And the small creature that you created, how did you create that? Did you go into a computer and create it in a 3D, well, in a form, and then it was printed, or did you use sketches and then put them into your computer? How do you work?
Kind of a big combination of all those things you've kind of mentioned. So a lot of the time, I'm kind of just interested in having certain things that are in kind of archives, but I can't have them. But what's happening nowadays is a lot of archives are kind of putting digital models of their collections online. So I was able to, I think the base of it is kind of some kind of crustacean that I took from Dundee University's collection and printed that, and then I kind of model more like a traditional sculptor. When I have that kind of piece, I'll place more kind of parts in it and gouge parts out, add kind of electrical components, carve into it, and then I'll rescan that and reprint it again. And it kind of just becomes this kind of thing. So it kind of has different outfits in a way, like I can kind of change it up and kind of have it can have a different head. And I kind of thought that might be quite of an interesting thing for new contemporaries, that maybe it could have been like switched around. So like if you came to see it another day, it would be like a different robot that would kind of gather different bits and kind of can choose a new shell one day if it felt like it. So, you know what I mean? I kind of want to play with these kind of ideas. It kind of is always transforming.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Judith. There was one question on the chat. Where did your interest in mythology come from?
It's quite interesting. Like, I've always kind of been interested in kind of myths. I was like obsessed with kind of like magic and kind of like alchemy and all these kind of things when I was younger. And I kind of didn't really know how to bring it into my practice, but it kind of just sort of arrived like that. And I guess I'm interested in looking at a lot of kind of Renaissance art and things like that, and it kind of just finds its way in. The kind of idea of appropriating kind of something from mythology is kind of quite interesting. And I think today, like, myths are still as important. That like myths seem to be something that makes us kind of human in a way. Like we kind of gravitate towards these things in order to imagine kind of a new future. And I don't know, I kind of just feel that these kind of myths can tell us something about how the world will change and how we will change. And I don't really know why I necessarily gravitate towards it, but in a way, going back to maybe what Livy was saying, like what I'll do next, it seems to be this common theme that I'm working through the whole kind of Greek mythology one myth at a time. So I don't know, maybe I can look at kind of myths which follow and kind of put them back into the work, and it could become this kind of bigger show of different kind of pieces, if you know what I mean.
Very interesting. thank you very much. If we could give Noel a round of applause, that'd be great for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's fascinating. This is the second time I've heard you speak about your work, and I go away with more questions than I come with because there's so much information there.
Yeah.
But I'd like to thank you again for taking part. We've had some fantastic talks over the past 2 weeks, and it's been a really interesting program that we've been running just to kind of get our members together and talk about their practice. So I'd like to thank everyone that's come along to that, and if you just keep an eye out on our website, there'll be more things coming in the next couple of months, so just keep a kind of eye out on for what we've got planned. So I'm going to call it quits there for SSA Dialogues of this week, but thank you very much once again, and we'll see you all again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Joel.